Welcome to week 7 of KHS392, Sport Marketing and Fundraising. In this PowerPoint, we'll be covering Chapter 12, which talks about social media, and Chapter 16, which is the future of sport marketing. Let's start with Chapter 12, Social Media in Sport. So looking at the Chapter 12 objectives, the first one is to examine the types of social media content and all the tactics that are commonly used in sport marketing. The second is to understand how to integrate that social media programming into the overall marketing communications mix and how it fits within the marketing mix. And the third one is to recognize how to generate followers on social media content and what organizations, leagues, teams, and athletes can do to help increase their following. So as always, we have to define the topic that we're talking about. What is social media? Well, social media is the collective of online communication channels dedicated to community-based input, interaction, content sharing, and collaboration. And that social media, the interaction, the content sharing, can take a number of forms. Typically, it's in the form of online forums, perhaps microblogging, or vlogging, which is video blogging, social networking, which we typically think of as Facebook or Twitter, and also wikis, like Wikipedia. And many people don't really think of wikis or Wikipedia as a social network or social media platform. But when you think about it, in terms of content sharing and collaboration, Wikipedia is developed and identified and created by content users. A really important concept of social media is looking at the growth. And the growth of all those various social media platforms really allows marketers of the organizations, leagues, teams, facilities, whatever it might be, to have a much more direct communication stream and interaction with the consumers or with the fans. And you can see from the graphic on the right-hand side the numbers associated with the Facebook community alone. Nearly 1.5 billion people on Facebook each month, 800 million people interacting on WhatsApp each month, 700 million interacting on Messenger each month, and nearly 300 million people posting and interacting with each other on Instagram each month. We also have to realize that the social media followers, those people who are following an organization online, are much more numerous and greater numbers than traditional team opt-in consumers. So the professional teams, leagues, athletes on Facebook and Twitter have followings in the hundreds of thousands. In some cases, we're talking about millions. And that is much more than people actually interact with that product or service face to face. Hundreds of thousands and millions of people interacting online is much different than the thousands that actually attend an event. If we look at the most popular sport teams in the world, based on the total followers through Facebook and Twitter, you can see that the majority of them are European soccer clubs, leading by Barcelona, Real Madrid, and on the end, the 10th most popular, Juventus FC from Italy. And in that, there are two North American NBA teams, the Lakers and the Bulls. But you can see just in terms of followers on Facebook and Twitter, we're talking in the 80 plus, nearly 100 million people following just two teams. When turning to the specific athletes, the most popular athletes on social media, when we're talking about only Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, Cristiano Ronaldo, nearly 275 million followers on those three content platforms. Neymar, nearly half of that, but still quite a bit. Lionel Messi, we have LeBron James, who is a respectable 100 million followers. And again, looking at this, we can see that the majority of them are soccer players on a global scale. So looking outside of North America and outside the United States, we have some of those notable athletes who are much more popular online through social media, through the global sport of soccer. So then you might ask yourself, why is social media valuable in sport? Why is it valuable for organizations, for athletes and leagues to be part of this social media content? First, it builds an audience of fans to interact with in real time. As you know, social media is nearly instantaneous. A person can tweet something or post something on Facebook, and it's nearly instantaneous that it reaches the fans or consumers. And that is really important this day and age when we demand information really quickly. The second point why it's valuable is that it engages consumers in the way that they really want to be engaged. And what that means is that we can program our social media content to deliver us information when we want it to. So you can block friends on Facebook. You can have notifications sent to you when a certain person tweets. These are all the ways that we can tailor it individually for us to engage with specific people, with specific products, leagues, and teams the way that we want to engage them. And that's really valuable for sport. The third point is that it's viral. And in many cases, we see viral videos, viral comments that really flow throughout the social media platforms, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. A lot of these things interact between the platforms and make it viral where a lot of people interact with it. And ultimately, it drives the behavior that drives the business. So ideally, social media is valuable to the organizations because it can promote activity, it can promote the behavior in terms of purchasing and awareness that ultimately will create a positive bottom line for those organizations. So some effective techniques for social media management and some of the industry's best practices are to build an audience. Obviously, you do that through a number of different ways, but by building an audience, you can engage fans and ultimately drive behavior, engaging those consumers to take action and purchase a product or potentially click on a link that might lead them to more information. You have to choose the appropriate platform depending again on your target market and your segmentation strategies. Perhaps the people that you're trying to reach aren't engaged with Twitter. Maybe they're only Facebook users, or maybe they're only Instagram users. You have to choose the appropriate platform that you want to reach in order to meet your corporate objectives. Obviously, you have to avoid all the pitfalls and the potentially unsavory tweets by potential athletes or people associated with your organization. Sometimes you can't control it, but you do your best from a marketing perspective to control that and prevent that from happening. And lastly, an organization needs to leverage the players, the talent, or the employees of the organization. So, for example, the Cleveland Cavaliers need to leverage the popularity of LeBron James for their organization. They might need to link some tweets or some Facebook posts by LeBron James to the Cavaliers website and leverage the popularity of LeBron and his 100,000 followers to promote and bring awareness to the parent brand organization. And as we said earlier, building an audience is crucial for an organization. An organization can use a wide number of initiatives through social media to promote themselves. One way is in-game or in-event social media campaigns. And if you look at the graphic on the right, it's a picture from the Denver Broncos. And on their big screen, they are able to ask you to tweet your hashtag Broncos photos from tonight's game. That's one way to interact with the consumers in real time using social media. Organizations and leagues also do this during live broadcasts, where maybe on the bottom of the screen you see scrolling, tweet your messages to a specific hashtag. There are several other online, direct, and digital marketing efforts, so maybe on a specific website or a direct mailing through email are asking you to post certain things or log on to a specific website. And finally, building an audience through social media on traditional advertising mediums. So print media, billboards, magazines, and having a hashtag or a Facebook link. These are all types of strategies that organizations use to build the audience. But when we're engaging fans, we have to grow the social media base by including content that prevents people from tuning out. We have to keep it interesting. We have to keep it interactive and engaging to those consumers, or else people are going to swipe left, they're going to delete, they're going to block the social media content. Now, some best practices for this strategy is to do authenticity of the voice and varying of voice, meaning that you need to be real. You need to be authentic in what you post. You can't put something out that seems really fake or what people really don't consider as being true to the brand. And also using varying voices, from the athletes, from the owners, from the spectators, using all these different perspectives in the social media strategy is really going to engage fans. You have to listen to those people that interact over social media, from their comments and their likes and dislikes, and you have to learn from that. If an organization puts out a specific tweet or social media campaign and there's lots of dislikes or lots of negative comments, the organization has to learn that perhaps maybe their strategy isn't really working well. And then from that commentary, from that feedback, the organizations need to optimize, really pin down and finalize the message that they're going to deliver, and then deliver it to the right target market and the right consumers that they're trying to hit through the specific social media platforms that are going to engage those fans. Now, looking on the flip side of the coin, some of the other social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram actually pay athletes and organizations to provide content on their social media sites. So Facebook is paying Barcelona Soccer Club over $1 million to produce content for that site. Now, on the low end, they are providing individual athletes like Ricardo Kaká, a smaller amount, but still paying him to produce content to Facebook. And again, Facebook pays out this money in order to drive people towards their social media platform over somebody else's. Ultimately, driving that behavior through social media, organizations want to encourage followers and consumers to engage in specific behaviors that are aligned with those organizational strategic objectives. In some cases, it's to purchase tickets and actually attend events. In some cases, it's increasing television ratings or developing awareness through television exposure, media exposure. And more importantly, in some cases, is to use social media to engage the sponsors of that organization. And turning back to a previous slide, organizations want to avoid the pitfalls associated with social media. sport marketers want to adopt practices that hopefully will avoid embarrassing mistakes. In some cases, organizations, teams, and franchises will manage the access to the accounts of specific athletes. They might control those specific outlets. They might reserve the right to delete specific information, but also doing it within the realm that's appropriate for the athlete. And also owning your own mistakes. If you do make a mistake on social media, make sure that you own it, make sure that you correct it, and make sure that you pay attention to the media backlash that might be consumed by it. And lastly, what I mentioned before, you really need to leverage the players and the talent that they bring to the organization. One of the big appeals, one of the drawing factors of social media with sport fans is that the athletes can really communicate directly to the fans. The coaches, the athletes can really instantaneously, in real time, hit these consumers. And those interactions should be leveraged by the organization to increase their awareness. And if you look at the figure on the right, we're looking at social media as it pertains to the fan engagement. And that's not simply the number of followers that they have, but the number of people that interact, the number of people that comment on photos, the number of people that like photos, the amount of people that the actual athlete might comment back. And we can look at Alex Morgan from, again, the U.S. women's national soccer team, has a very high engagement rating. Roger Federer, again, very popular on social media. He interacts with his fan. We have Lionel Messi in the middle, Luke Shaw towards the end, Danny McCaskill towards the end. The next part of this voiceover is going to look at Chapter 16 and the future of sport marketing and the shape of things to come. Now, the objectives of Chapter 16 as it pertains to the authors is to provide insight with regard to all those challenges and opportunities facing sport marketers and the sport marketing industry in the next few years. The second is to look at their opinions about sport marketing and how it's going to influence the industry in the next decade, and also to consider the future developments in the industry and how all those changes within the sport industry and field are going to hit and impact the developments of sport marketing. An interesting thing to keep in mind is that the textbook was written several years ago, so it's sort of reflecting on what has happened in the past, looking at the future, but also recognizing what is the current state of the industry. Now, keeping in mind that the textbook was written several years ago, the authors look at what their projections were from 2013 and where the book is now. One of the first things that they talk about is the portability of sport viewership and how connectivity and on-demand information will affect sport marketing. The second thing they talk about is how sport facilities in both Europe and Asia will become more Americanized, and in that influenced by interest, media, potential league expansion, the greater influence of sponsors and how they structure those organizations. And also how in the United States, small market baseball owners will try to pressure the Major League Baseball organization to improve the lack of competitiveness, meaning that the small market owners are trying to pressure the league and try to make it more even among organizations. The authors also predict that the corporate sponsor names and their logos associated with that corporate sponsor will appear on uniforms within the U.S. professional leagues. And since 2013, we can see that especially happening with the NBA. Yes, it happens with Major League Soccer, but that is very traditional to soccer as an industry. The new realm with the NBA and their individual logos on the left shoulder is something that they potentially have gotten right. They also suggest that college athletics programs at most major universities will add ticket sales departments, and that has absolutely happened. Learfield marketing has taken over nearly 75% of all major college athletic departments in terms of their marketing overall and how they do marketing and promotions, but also how they run the individual ticket sales programs. And lastly, they suggest that women's professional sport leagues are going to show little to real growth. And that is somewhat true. Women's sport, we're talking about specifically WNBA, because that is the most recognized professional women's sport, has shown growth, but overall, relative to other leagues across the globe, the WNBA and women's sports have shown very minimal growth overall. The authors also suggest that cell phones are going to become a ticket and credit card clearinghouse that's accepted at sport facilities and, again, continue to be sources of interactive marketing. And again, we've seen this. We've seen this occur. Everything from StubHub to Ticketmaster to the individual organizations themselves have issued e-tickets and have become the clearinghouse for your opportunity and your ticket into an event. The authors also suggest that at least one of the major U.S. sport leagues, other than the NFL, is going to have its championship game at a neutral site. Now, we can consider college athletics and that maybe as a professional sport, but that is in a neutral site. But in more all-star games being located in major entertainment and tourism destinations, which the authors got right. They have been looking for major tourist destinations and major places that people would like to visit in and outside of the event itself. Now, in terms of the author's predictions for the year 2020, one of the first things that they talk about is corporate sponsorship names and logos that might appear on game uniforms. And again, we've seen this in the WNBA and the NBA and MLS. Whether we see it in Major League Baseball or NFL, that still is yet to be seen. They also talk about how the big four professional leagues in the United States are going to expand and include the big five, and also including Major League Soccer. So you have NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, and they also suggest adding MLS. And in some cases, many people these days also include NASCAR in that specific context of maybe having a big six. They also suggest that the success of the 4-team playoff in the college football playoffs will result in potentially another round of conversations to expand that playoff format. We've already seen this where people are suggesting that the college football playoffs are expanded to more teams than just the four. But again, this is something that we'll have to wait to see and whether it happens or not. The authors also suggest that the fan or consumer involvement in the decision making of the organization will increase. And that decision making will include potentially how the sport is played, how the sport is packaged or how it's presented, or even the specific plays that are called on the field. Some teams have already utilized this and used social media and the instantaneous Twitter feeds to potentially call plays once a quarter, but the authors predict that this is going to be a much more fashionable and much more increased interaction with the consumers. The authors also suggest that globalization in general is going to increase the competition for broadcasting rights, and that will continue to increase at a high rate over the next few years. And again, that's sort of something that's given. The competition among media rights has increased. The competition among broadcasters has brought the price of media rights to an all-time high. That brings us to the end of the content of the lecture for this week. In the next slide, I'll again rehash all the information as it relates to the final exam. So as a reminder, the final exam is this week. If you haven't already taken it, it's online, located in the Quiz and Final Exam tab on Blackboard. The exam opens at 12 noon on Monday during week 7, and you'll have until the end of the day on Friday to take the exam. Again, you'll have 3 hours to complete it, keeping in mind that once you start, you can't go back. And it contains 65 questions, multiple choice, true, false, and short answer, and looks very similar to the quiz that you've already taken. So you should be very familiar with how it looks. And last but not least, thank you for bearing with me through the session. Thanks for bearing with me through these lectures. I hope you learned something from this content. And please, again, let me know if you need anything. Let me know if you need any connections. Let me know if you need anything in the future. Peace.